welcome to the Healing the Patriarchy with Love podcast, the show that creates a kinder world free of patriarchy by celebrating the brilliance of humans who are healing the patriarchy with love. Together we focus on the positive to amplify it, birthing a brighter future for all. Hello everyone, thank you for being here. It's wonderful to be together with you again, and it's such an honour and a joy to be sharing today's episode with you all. I'm Luna, I'm your host, and we're joined today by Jennifer Robinson. Jennifer is the owner of the You Are Loved Facebook page, a place that gives you inspiring posts to love yourself and be more gentle with yourself. She is also an earth angel who helps school children to heal from trauma and adverse childhood experiences using the 5 awakenings sequence and faces, which is freeing adverse childhood experiences. Wow, that's quite the resume. Hello and welcome, Jennifer. It's lovely to have you here with us.
Thank you. Yes, that's brought a tear to my eye. Yes, I do feel very passionate about working with children and teenagers. So thank you.
Yeah, do you know, today I sort like in the morning I kind of prepare for the podcast, for whoever's on. It doesn't matter who's on, and one of the things I do is I connect with my own inner child to make sure that she's going to be okay throughout the podcast, because often we're talking about quite difficult things. And this morning I was connecting in with her and she was excited to be with you, because I really do feel like I'm in the presence of a real actual angel. And so she got dressed up in a little kind of angel fairy costume with a magic wand. I just thought that was so cute, because I do feel like you're a real angel, and I'm very honored to be in your presence, and absolutely the work that you are doing is remarkable. I think it's incredible. And so we're going to talk a bit about that today, aren't we? And I think just before we kind of get into talking about it, I would just like to say to listeners that we are probably going to touch on, and I'm not sure how deep we're going to go because it'll just be in the natural flow of things, but we are going to be talking about adverse childhood experiences, which incorporates childhood trauma. Sadly, abuse is quite common, so we might be touching on that. And there may be things in there that trigger you. So I'm just letting listeners know so you can kind of check in with yourself, notice if you're okay to kind of listen to an episode about that today. And if you're not, you can, of course, always download it or save it for later and come back to it. So you're welcome to come back to it anytime. Or if you feel like you're okay today and you can actually listen to that kind of thing, then feel free to proceed and stay with us. So, Jennifer, do you want to kind of maybe tell us a little bit about what an adverse childhood experience is? What do I mean when I say that? What am I talking about?
Thank you and bless you. And just to say, I think it is so important, isn't it, to just check in with what we're feeling when we're listening to things, particularly in the world where with social media, where we have access to everything. At one time, we wouldn't have access to all this so readily available. And I think it's a really important point that I think people don't realise is that even just scrolling through your social media, that somewhere, your subconscious is kind of taking all that in, even if your conscious mind isn't. And I think it's really good to mention that, to just say that you just need to check in with yourself as to what you're listening to, and to just check that you're okay. And just say thank you so much about the little bit about your inner child. That's so beautiful. Thank you so much, and bless you for your really kind words. So adverse. So I think first of all I wanted to talk about adverse childhood experiences, because I just think it is such a powerful study, and that in our times, I think that it is something that it is getting more well known, but I just think that it's a study that was done, and I think it's something I kind of feel like I want to talk about it lots, and that everybody should know about it, because it's really putting the links together between our upbringing and childhood maltreatment, and then it's linked to like our later health and well-being in life. So it as a lot of things did, it actually started as a coincidence. There was a doctor, Dr. Vincent, I think it's Felitti, who was in San Diego, and he actually had an obesity clinic, and he got quite frustrated that there was high dropout rates in his clinic. So he'd have a small number of people who they would lose weight and the weight would stay off. But he found that he had quite a large number of people that they would lose weight, but then they would put the weight back on. And he was really quite frustrated. So he decided that he was going to have a look at this. He was like, there must be something going on. Just looking at this from purely a clinical, a study perspective, he's like, there must be something that I'm missing here, because this was his speciality, this was his passion. And actually what he was finding was that what he was doing wasn't working in the long term. He could make it work in the short term, but not in the long term. So he started to study this, and he started to look at what was the link between the people who put the weight back on and the people who lost the weight and kept it off. And he came across by accident a link between childhood sexual abuse and obesity. So I just want to make that clear, that that does not mean that anybody who is obese has experienced childhood sexual abuse. That is not what he's saying at all. But what he found in his data was there was a high prevalence with people who were obese had experienced childhood sexual abuse, and that part of the obesity and the weight was about the eating as a self-soothing mechanism, and also the weight as kind of like a protection, that keeping the weight on to kind of like somewhere psychologically there was some feeling of protection. So this was quite a development and quite a find, and it was not something he was expecting to find. So he then worked with another doctor, Dr. Robert Ander, who was a researcher, and he at the time was working in the Centre for Disease Control and Prevention, and they collaborated together to explore the association between just childhood experiences and the health throughout life. And that study involved over 17,000 people. So they did a study where they asked them about the health history and as well as their childhood experiences. And the childhood experiences, there are lots of childhood experiences, but what they found that the 10 most common and the 10 that had the most impact were, put them into 3 categories of abuse, neglect, and family circumstances. So in the abuse was either physical, emotional, or sexual abuse. In the neglect was physical or emotional neglect. And the family circumstances were children experienced, lived in a home where there was domestic violence, substance abuse, mental illness, parental separation, divorce, or there was a parent in prison. And the results that they found were that for people to have 1 or more ACEs, the prevalence was 2 out of 3. So 2 out of 3 people had 1 or more, which actually, if you look at that, just, mentioned in there, parental separation and divorce. So that's an understandable one to understand, that 2 out of 3 would have experienced those family circumstances. The number of ACEs, if you had 4 or more ACEs, the prevalence was 1 out of 8. So that dropped a little when it was 4 or more. But what came out from the study was they actually talked about, and they started to link, and this is the bit that I think is so powerful, was they actually started to link and put the data together about the impact that it had on your issues as an adult. So the more ACEs you experience as an individual in childhood, the greater the risk there was of developing a whole range of mental, social and physical health issues as an adult. So anyone who'd experienced 4 or more ACEs were more likely to experience health problems or to engage in health risky behaviours. So, and they've put statistics with this, which again, I think is just, I find this mind-blowing. I can't believe that this is down on paper, that this link, that the effect of having of what you've experienced in childhood can impact you as an adult physically. So if you've had 4 or more ACEs, you are 2.9 times more likely to experience heart disease. If you have had 4 or more ACEs, you are 1.6 more times likely to have cancer, 4 times more likely to have lung disease, 4.6 times more likely to have depression, and really, really sadly, 12.2 times more likely to commit suicide, and 9.7 times more likely to use heroin. So I just think that those statistics are quite important and quite something that is, I think, really important for our times to look at, that we're starting to link these things together, that as well as people go to the doctors and they look at their symptoms and doctors treat them with medication for their symptoms, but we are starting to look at the bigger picture of what else is. Yes, we can give medication to treat the physical things that you're experiencing, but actually, what is the actual cause of these physical? And I just think that this study is really, really important in talking about and addressing the actual root cause of these physical symptoms. And that actually, when we start to treat the root cause, then we have better success in treating the physical illnesses that people are experiencing.
Oh, thank you so much. You've explained that so well. And those are some really harrowing statistics. Quite worrying, really, to think that is happening in the world. And it does explain why some of those illnesses that you mentioned, for example, and some of those difficulties are so prevalent in adulthood. And it's wonderful in a way that it's being linked back, because it means we can do something about it. And I know myself, I'm a real fan at getting to the root of things, because, if you're weeding your garden and you just pull the leaves off a weed, it's just going to grow back. You have to pull the whole root out, don't you? So that it doesn't come back. And I think it's the same in life. We have to get to the root. So that's what I really love about this, that it's kind of getting to the root and saying, let's do something about this at this point here. So what happened after this study? How has it kind of come to be in schools? Because I know you're working with this in schools and helping people. What was kind of the next step from that study that kind of has led to it being in schools, and is it in other places as well? What's happening?
So yes, after this study, obviously this then started to be wrote about, and this started in America. So the next, well, not kind of like one of the next steps, but one of the important steps was a paediatrician, Nadine Burke-Harris. She decided to carry out research with her patients, in particular with children. And she did her research and decided to focus on a socially deprived area of San Francisco. And she then started to find that that children with 4 or more ACEs were 32 times more likely to have learning and behaviour problems in school than those who didn't have any. So from that, it then started to progress out into schools and into the teaching profession, that this then started to become part of professional development, that teachers started to learn the fact that ACEs existed and the impact on what it was having on children. And so it then started to spread out into education and also into other areas. So I know that in this country, it has the police, the NHS. There are lots of different organisations who have started to train their staff in this area, so that they have an understanding in how that they treat people and work with them. So as a school that I've been working in, we had a study and a project that was actually funded partly by the NHS and partly by the police, because the results of the ACEs are that people will end up needing the services of the NHS or be involved with the police. So the NHS and the police were very interested in wanting to look at the earlier that we can start working with this, then hopefully this will have an impact in the long term, in that people will be less likely to need the NHS and be involved in the police services. So lots of schools, social services, the police, I know, have had lots of training on this. Lots of companies have now started taking on where they will provide professional development in training and understanding this. So we started in our school with, first of all, just actually having a training day with the staff on actually looking at this and having an understanding of the impact of childhood experiences, what they were experiencing at home and how that would impact them in school. So in particular, one of the high things that happens is that if children are experiencing these things at home, then when they come into the classroom, it is very likely that they are in a situation of fight or flight. They could also be in fawn or freeze. So these children are in fight or flight. So when they come into their classroom, their nervous systems are already on alert. The nervous systems are already, the alarm bells are already ringing. They're already feeling in a high state of anxiety, a high state of that, that they don't feel safe. They feel that something's going to happen. So before they've even started any learning, before they've even started to engage with any adults, they're already on sort of high alert. So we have done a lot of work and training around about how to interact with pupils, how to speak to pupils. So how to use language that is de-escalating, how to use language that is calming, so that you are able to, first of all, help the pupil to calm their nervous system and help them to understand that the reason that they're maybe having issues with the behaviour and the learning is not necessarily because of anything negative they feel about themselves, but is actually because of what is going on in their nervous system. So our first place was working with staff on, first of all, staff understanding what ACEs is and what it means. The second step with staff was actually on training, and that training is ongoing in about how we actually talk to pupils, because the way that we communicate to them, we have the ability to be able to soothe their nervous system, to help them feel safe, and we can use language that will help to de-escalate them and to de-escalate any problems that would happen. The second part of that is actually teaching the pupils about this. So actually in the school that I'm at, in year 7 and 8, they study a topic on the curriculum that is called resilience. And one of those aspects is that they actually study what ACEs is. So they actually learn for themselves what is ACEs, what is the impact, and also, more importantly, actually what can they do about it? What things can they do to help themselves? So teaching them breathing techniques, teaching them mindfulness, working with, when I work on one-to-one with pupils, I work on using the 5 awakening sequence with them to help them to process any trauma that has happened. So that's kind of in our school, it's that sort of 3-part plan, is that training the staff, first of all, in ACEs, training the staff in the language that they use to help to soothe the nervous system and to de-escalate anything that they are feeling. And then the third part is actually to focus on this being a topic that pupils and children study themselves, so that they also have an understanding and have access to resources to help them to actually understand the nervous system and to soothe and calm the nervous system and anything that may be happening for them.
That's a lot of work that's gone on. I've got quite a few questions. I love that the nervous system is being addressed, because I find that's key. I find that key with me. I've got I score very high on the scale of adverse childhood experiences. And my nervous system, even as an adult, is like a full-time job to try and regulate it. So I love that is in schools. I think that's absolutely brilliant. But what I was wondering when you were speaking was, this was delivered to staff, but no doubt many staff, if not all of them, will have had adverse childhood experiences themselves. So how was that training initially received? Was it a shock? Was there any fallout, or was staff just kind of okay with it? How did that go?
Yeah, I think a mixture of all of those. The first one was that there was quite a lot of shock. And I think once people have recovered from the shock, there was an understanding and I think a new perspective on why you were doing the work that you were doing. And for some, it was quite emotional, in that understanding what pupils were experiencing. And so understanding the impact that you could have. And so by you having your understanding, and by you using de-escalating language, calming language, knowing what a pupil is experiencing, knowing where to send them, for quite a lot of staff also, this like renewed and a deeper understanding of why they're doing the job that they're doing and how important it is. And that in this, in the times that we're in now, that, we are moving towards that we can see that subjects like knowledge, you can just go and find knowledge on the internet. Actually, that's something, and eventually will we get to a point where actually, you don't need to be taught anything specifically, because you can find that knowledge. But actually, what you do need from other people and other adults is the help in regulating your nervous system, the help in modeling healthy relationships, modeling healthy communication. So there was shock, there was upset. As you said, for some people, they realised actually that they'd also experienced ACEs, and there was support given for those. There was, a renewed compassion for the job that they do, and there was also, it's kind of, I suppose, I'm in my mind drawing a wave. There's kind of like a wave, because when you look at this information, like you said, at first it can be overwhelming and can feel, oh my gosh, how on earth do I cope with this? So going through, and I suppose the Kubler-Ross like grief cycle, that sort of curve of you go through oh my gosh, how on earth do I cope with this, knowing that this is what's happening. And then you as you process that through your own nervous system, then actually you then feel better, because you're like, actually, you realize that you can do something about this. Quite a number of years ago, I started to do a master's degree in emotional intelligence. I, similar to you, have a very fragile nervous system. And at the time, I couldn't complete the master's degree because I couldn't stop crying because I'm very emotional person. But one of the things at the start of the course they told us was that, I think it was about that the conditioning of the nervous system and the brain was developed very young, in generally the first sort of 7 years of life. So how children respond and react to situations emotionally is set up by what happens in the first 7 years. And at first this was quite overwhelming, that it was kind of like, actually all these children, they're, you know, they've been programmed, the nervous system has been programmed in how to respond emotionally. And at first it felt quite overwhelming in that, gosh, what on earth can I do about this now? But what they talked also about was that the research showed that, I think it was that in schools, if children and teenagers have one consistent adult who they have a healthy, consistent relationship where there is positive communication, positive interactions, then actually what you can do is you can actually remodel and reprogram the nervous system just through having healthy interaction with one healthy role model adult in the school, which made me feel so much better. So it's that, like you said, at first it's a shock to hear all these things. But as you go through the curve, there is actually, yes, it is a shock. And then once you take the time for you to process that, you do kind of come back up the curve going, actually, I've got things that I can do. I've got things that I can help these children. So there was a real sort of mixed reaction and prompted lots of conversations. And also now when we are dealing with things in school, there are lots of, it's given a lot of scope for conversation. So for example, when we are dealing with behaviour issues, the conversations are not around actually, you know, what has this child done wrong? What consequence should we give them? It is, okay, first of all, it is, could I have handled that any better? Could I have handled that differently? Was it that the child was in a state of, you know, the nervous system was in a state of high arousal, and actually I maybe as a teacher and an adult, having, you know, been in a school and taught lessons all day, maybe my nervous system was in high arousal and maybe I didn't deal with that in the best way. Right, what is the best way that we can sort of move forward with this? How do we support this child instead of seeing this child as this child is badly behaved, this child is a problem child? Actually, this child has unmet needs. How can we work on meeting those unmet needs so that we get the best out of us and the best out of them? So there's been lots of areas that it has started to impact and work through.
Yeah, my sense with that then was this kind of deep healing that staff and students are going through together, really. Like I could picture the wave as well. You mentioned a wave, and I certainly could feel that kind of the peaks and troughs that you go through when you're in that kind of transformative phase, from going from kind of one way of teaching and looking at, you know, behaviors, and a totally new way, which is much more empathic and kind for everyone. It's kinder for the teachers as well, isn't it? And that's what I really like about it. And thank you as well for sharing about your emotional intelligence course. And I think you're such a beautiful person. I think it's really beautiful that you were crying so much and that you've been able to share that. So thank you. I think my next question is actually around, you spoke a little bit about this de-escalating language and this kind of calming language that you're now using with pupils, and sounds like maybe you're using it with each other as well, you know, this kind of more sort of open, curious inquiry. It feels non-judgmental from what you were just talking about there, you know, saying, could I have done something better? Is the student, you know, is their nervous system dysregulated? Why is that? Those kind of more open and non-judgmental questions. So can you just talk to us a little bit about this de-escalating language and the kind of soothing that you're doing? What's that like? And is that just with students, or is it with staff as well? Are you kind of all supporting each other? What's happening? And I guess because I've never worked in a school, I'm trying to get some insight into what it's kind of like day to day. So let's say you've got a dysregulated or a student that's just showing some, what we used to term, you know, bad or naughty behavior. What would happen in school when that happened? Can you kind of give us an example without sharing any confidential information?
Yes. So just to say that, so firstly, what with education is something that everyone has experienced, and so everyone has, I suppose, an experience and an opinion and what they've experienced. Secondly, this is yeah, it's a work in progress, and I think the place that we're at now is that it has been a work in process, and that schools can be a very challenging place to be, because they are so full on. They are, particularly if you, well, I mean, I know that all schools, but I know that I've always been in secondary, so it's full of teenagers who just take it, you know, the terminology teenager, they can be hormonal, they you know, peer issues. There's kind of lots of things that come with a teenager before you start to put on ACEs, and the fact we've just been through the pandemic, all of those things. So it's always I suppose a cycle, and keep moving forward. I think the important part of the process, and I will give some examples, is that it's a reflective process. It's a process where it isn't completely perfect. There will still, even me, gosh, that sounds really, just even me, but I know I try to be, as you know, my nature is to be calm and patient, and to see the person as a whole person, and to see their behavior as is always communicating something. That it can be that at the end of the day, if you've taught 6 lessons or 5 lessons, you've had 5 different groups of teenagers, by the end of the last lesson, you know, it takes a lot of personal skill, personal development, personal stamina to start, take a deep breath. And this is one of the techniques that we are, the Schoolman at the moment is going through a 2-year process of coaching and working with staff, and it is very much around looking at the language that we use. And one of the things that we're talked about is just that, asking ourselves, right, just before we interact, just stop for a moment and take a breath. Am I in the right place? Am I centered? Am I coming from the right place? Am I maybe feeling a bit emotional? And if I am, maybe stop, take a breath and go, right. Sometimes I've got a good awareness, and I will say to a pupil, if I know that in that moment I can't deal with something, say for example, a pupil is unsettled in class and is kind of a bit giddy and maybe a bit hyper, maybe a little bit, you know, the nervous system, when I use that language, the nervous system essentially is quite aroused, and they are maybe not aware of that, and so aren't using any sort of techniques in that moment to regulate themselves. And if actually I may be feeling slightly, I will kind of, it's that thing of speaking quietly to the pupil. So actually there's a whole set of things that would go with that. So for me, the traditional scene would be that if you see a pupil who is maybe a bit giddy, who is not focused on the work, is not calm, that maybe as a teacher you'd be stood at the front and you would shout across the classroom and kind of say something that would be quite, now when you reflect upon it and you step back, quite derogatory, quite shame-based, and those in itself, that if you are, and that, you know, in the past, I know that we've part of our training as well is we've talked about our own educational experiences, and mine were that, you know, they were in the 80s where it was very much shame-based, and it was very much that kind of style, management for your behaviour. So traditionally, that's what it would have been, that you would have had a teacher just stand at the front and just kind of, you know, so it's public, you are publicly saying something, publicly shaming somebody. Whereas actually now, it would be, actually, I would go to the child, I'd go to where they are, and actually I would get down on my knees and I'd just kind of say to them, okay, are you in the right, you know, are you in the right frame of mind? Is everything, or sometimes I would just say, is everything okay? I can see that you look like you're a little bit giddy. Are you aware that you're a little bit giddy? So I'm starting to teach them that, for them to tune into how they're feeling, because one of the big barriers is that teenagers don't always know how they're feeling. They don't always recognize that. They just kind of bounce along in whatever they're feeling and don't stop and go, how am I feeling? So one strategy would be I would literally just go up to them, and I wouldn't stand up. I would kind of get down on my knees so that I'm at a level with them. So it's equity, it's equality. I'm kind of like, okay, how are you feeling? Is everything all right? Just the straightforward, is everything okay? And sometimes that in itself, they'll be kind of like, oh, actually, no, I'm not actually. I had a bit of a fallout with my friend at break time and I'm feeling a bit wired. Or, oh, actually, this morning I had an argument with my mum before I left school and I've not been able to settle since. So just that stopping, instead of challenging the behaviour in front of the whole class, actually just going up to them and quietly saying, is everything okay? And sometimes I'll describe to them, I'll say, for me, I would describe you as hyper or giddy. And what I'm seeing is, I'm seeing that you look like you're kind of jumping about, you look like you're not able to sit still. Is everything okay? Because that must feel really uncomfortable. Because the reality is that if we take the old traditional stance that you stand and look at a behaviour and go, that child's naughty, that child's not doing the work. Actually, if you kind of like turn it around and think about, so if somebody's sat there and they're giddy and they're not relaxed, they're not able to focus on the work, actually, that's not a very nice thing to be feeling. To be sat in that position where you are hyper, you are wired, you are giddy, isn't a nice feeling, and it's not a nice thing to be experiencing. And so when you turn that around, you have a completely different perspective for the pupil. And when you approach it like that by saying, you know, are you okay? Because actually for me, if I felt like that, and I do have that, I think one of the reasons I can have so much empathy for children is because I've got a sensitive nervous system, I can feel hyper and wired and giddy. And so I have a complete understanding, because I know to the outside world, the hyper, the giddy, looks kind of like very entertaining and looks very funny and looks very, some even call it cool. And actually I'm like, do you know what? It's not actually. It feels very uncomfortable and I don't like how it feels. So just the first step of using that simple language of, are you okay? And just actually talking through, I'll describe to them what I'm seeing. This is what I'm seeing. Are you aware that you're not able to sit still? Because some people will not be aware. They'll be like, no, I'm not aware. And sometimes at first, so if I ask a pupil, are you aware that you're not able to sit still? They'll kind of be like, no, I'm fine. And so I'll be like, okay, I'm just letting you know, I'm just aware that, you know, I'm concerned you're not able to focus on your work. And I'm just concerned that there's something that is causing that, and are you aware of that? And I will then walk away. So I kind of walk away, and that is what will be called take-up time. So I would walk away and go and focus on something else, and then would go back maybe 5 or 10 minutes later. So it's not that confrontation of you're misbehaving, you're not doing your work, get on with it. It's a completely different approach, and would go back. And a lot of times, if at first they haven't recognized it, when I go back, they'll be like, oh, actually, yeah, I'm feeling a bit giddy. I am feeling a bit wired. Sometimes, and it will just all depend on individuals, their circumstances. It will depend on, you know, how they've recognized it. I've got quite a few pupils who do respond straight away. They'll be like, yeah, I get it, miss. You know what? I am a bit wired. I'm going to do some deep breathing. Can I just stand outside and have a breath? Can I just stand outside and just take a breath where actually it's really quiet, just reset my nervous system and come back in? And then there's a very small percentage where actually their nervous system is quite disrupted and quite dysregulated, and it takes quite a bit for them to work with that. Excuse me, and they will need more intense work to work with it.
Thank you so much. And I must admit, I'm smiling a bit because you've transported me back to my days in school as a pupil, because I was what was classed as extremely naughty. And you know, it was my nervous system that was dysregulated, and I was dealing with so much that no one should ever have to deal with. And I didn't have any support to deal with that. So I either didn't turn up to class and was bunking off, or I turned up to class and was completely the opposite. So I was totally silent and completely dissociated, not present. Or I was how you've just described, and I was kind of whipping people up into a frenzy to have a laugh, to do something, you know, that will get attention, that, you know, will disrupt the class. And so I guess is it showing up in lots of different ways, like how I've just described there with myself, or is it, or are you just looking at the ones that are being quite disruptive maybe in some ways?
No, I think you're quite right that it shows in lots of different behaviours. So if, like you said, for example, truanting, and if pupils are truanting, again, it's looking at, it's not you're truanting, here's a consequence, now go to lessons. Well, actually, there's a reason they didn't attend the lesson. So it's that thing of looking, you know, what's the reason that they're truanting, and asking those questions. And, you know, and having those conversations, starting to put those thoughts in their head with them and with families, so that you're starting to empower them, to get them to look and go, yes, you're truanting, yes, this is the behaviour, but actually, you know, what's the reason for this? Because actually, if everything was all okay, then actually you would maybe want to be in the lesson, you'd want to be learning. So what is it that's making you not want to be in there? And there can be a whole host of reasons. And it's then looking at tackling and putting support in and helping the pupil to identify what those are, so that they have that awareness, so that if it comes up again, they have that awareness of, oh, actually, you know, if I want to truant lessons, that's not me being necessarily being naughty. There's something going on that I need to look at. So it's that kind of teaching them to look at themselves. There is also, it's like I say, it's not just naughty pupils, but if, for example, you've got pupils who don't want to engage, who are in the classroom, who are very quiet, who may get looked over, and they're very quiet, but actually they're not engaging in the work. So again, it's the same thing of having those conversations of that, is everything okay? Because like you said, everybody traditionally talks about the fight or flight, but there is also the fawn and the freeze. And so the freeze is where, like you said, you are disassociated, you don't engage, you're literally just sat there. So you're very quiet, you're not causing an immediate issue, but actually you are on freeze. So you are disassociated. And if you're disassociated because for whatever reason, you don't feel safe in that moment. So again, it would be that if a pupil is not doing their work, it is not just that conversation of, actually, they're not doing the work, we need to, you know, get them to do the work. It's having those conversations. Why are they not doing the work? Having that conversation with them. And it's that starting that question of, is everything okay? And it kind of reminds me back of what comes to mind is that Oprah Winfrey did one of her programs on ACEs, and she talked about that now when she works with her staff, that she talks about, instead of, you know, why have you done this, it was what happened to you, which I just think is a really powerful question. We wouldn't straight away go to pupils, you know, if they're not doing the work, you wouldn't say what's happened to you, but you would start that question with, is everything okay? And then you would just start to ask those gentle questions that would start to help you and the people in the family to unpick what is going on.
Okay, yeah, I like that. And I like that it's got crossover. It can be used any age, any background, any place. So like you were talking about Oprah then, you know, in place of work. So it's got real potential, this, hasn't it? Something that I was wondering when you were talking about, you know, kind of like staff and students are getting this support, what is happening with parents and guardians, especially if they're the perpetrators? I'm just wondering, is the support for them or?
Yeah, so and this is our, I suppose, the next steps in development is that if it's inviting parents in for a meeting, it's talking to them, specifically along, there's lots of parent support around mental health. So when pupils are, if they're experiencing any mental health issues that have come from any of this, then there is a lot of parental support around that. We are starting to look at how to support parents more. The first place that we support them more is just in the, which, and not just because it's quite a powerful thing, but it's building that relationships with parents, building those connections, having those meetings, that when parents come in, it is around that the meetings aren't just around sort of, you know, telling them your child's not doing this, you need to sort this. It's looking at, we have in school a family support officer, so it is looking at, right, is there any outside services that we can connect you with where you need support? There is, if, for example, when we look at, if we've got pupils who've experienced trauma and a family who's experienced trauma, when we're aware of that knowledge, as we're working with the family and working with the pupil, it will be looking at and going, okay, what services can we forward them to? What support can be offered? Because they are they're experiencing trauma, and the behaviour is coming out with the children. So it is looking at what we can do to help and to refer them to, and also to educate. When we talk, when we talk to them, we talk about in the way that we talk to the children and the teenagers, the way that we talk to them. We were the same with the parents, is saying, helping them to understand, because a lot of parents are still have the understanding that for them, like, this is good behaviour or bad behaviour, and that for some parents it will be, actually, I'm a good parent or I'm a bad parent. And it is that thing of, actually, it's just looking at behaviour is just communicating something, and what we want to get to the bottom of is, what is it communicating, and how can we work with whatever it is that it's communicating.
Yeah, because there's a lot of commonality, isn't there? I mean, we're all human. We've all got nervous systems. We've all got trauma. We've all got challenges and difficulties. Not everybody has support. So I think it's wonderful that it's kind of spreading as far as it can, really, in order to support people. But when you were talking about it, then I was just thinking, oh my God, teachers have got so much to do already. So can I just check, are you a teacher or a therapist, or are you both, Jennifer?
Well, I'm at the moment, the role I'm at the moment, I do both. I am a teacher. I am employed as a teacher. I teach, and over my I've been at the school I'm at now for 9 years, and over that I've done lots of different roles. I have had a role where I've worked as I work at an emotional and resilience coach, as well as teach lessons, as well as at the moment my focus is on working with peer support, so working on training peers, so training the pupils to be mental health ambassadors, so that they start to have this understanding of this and they can start to support their peers, because that's a really important area where, if pupils will not go and talk to an adult, that they will go and talk to a peer. So at the moment I'm involved in working with supporting and training pupils to be peer mentors, and that's under the sort of training of mental health ambassadors, so that they can use those skills to help their peers. But it is, and this is a thing at the moment, there's a lot about in the teaching profession. There's been all the strikes. There's a lot at the moment about how many teachers are leaving the profession, because it is a really, really challenging profession to be in. That you're quite right. If you came into school and actually observed, the life of a teacher and the work that is done, that it isn't just literally preparing lessons and teaching. There is so much more to it. I'm involved in, I suppose, a lot more of those things, because my role is around working with the mental health and the ACEs and emotional resilience. So I am I actively working with a lot more of those areas? A lot of staff maybe won't work with as many areas that I do, but all those things are in, like I said, the main one around the teaching of the language that they use, just showing that as a teacher in your job, in teaching your subject, by using the language that you use and having the understanding of what background children can be experiencing, that in itself is powerful, and that can have an impact on the lives and the outcomes of pupils. So teaching is definitely more challenging, because we do definitely wear a lot more hats and have a lot more awareness, and we see a lot. And so as a consequence, we see a lot and work with a lot.
Yeah, I mean, I was listening to that thinking, I mean, I'm laughing, but I know it's not funny, so please, nobody
think I don't know.
Respectful, but it's just kind of laughing with a bit of shock, if you know what I mean. Kind of like teacher, social worker, mental health worker, just therapist, there's just so much all within that one role. And yeah, I don't blame staff striking at all. I've backed them anyway before I even heard this episode. But I really think we need more funding. And also, I'm wondering about other areas of education that are kind of dying off to make way for this kind of new way, because it feels like we can't have it all.
No.
It's a lot that you've just been talking about then. It's a lot. And I think it's so positive, what you're talking about and what is happening in schools. But I'm just wondering, is there any signs of maybe some other areas of education that are kind of dying off a little bit to make way for this? Are you seeing that yet? Or is that just not even happening yet?
I'm not aware of, or nothing is coming to mind straight away. I think that as a society we're in at the moment, the way that life works in general, irrelevant of what aspect of life you're in, everything is changing very quickly, and you're having to be adaptive. And I think one of the things in education, I'm not sure of what we would be losing. Nothing comes to mind, and there may be things that we are losing, but there isn't anything that comes to mind. Just that you are in a very high pressured job, a very high pressured environment where there are so many skills and so many facets that you're required to do to be able to do the job. And it maybe isn't so much, is there a particular thing that we are losing, but it's more about, to be able to be in education, is that you are requiring so many skills and so many that you're requiring a lot of skills and a lot of adaptability and flexibility to be able to be, not just survive, but to be able to do the job and to want to do it and to feel passionate and to also look after yourself. I think my first thing that happened to me was I started teaching, I think it's definitely, it's about 26, maybe 27 years ago. And I think it's no coincidence that as soon as I started teaching, I started to learn meditation. And so my journey has always been along the way that I have learned sort of personal development, spiritual development. And actually for me, it's been integrated, all of those things that has kept me at a point where I'm still in a school and still feeling passionate and still wanting to do those things. It hasn't been without its challenges. It is challenging. So yeah, I think to answer your question, I would say it's more maybe not what we're losing, but is that to be able to be in that, you need to have lots of skills.
Yeah, gosh, yeah, you must need meditation with all that going on, definitely. So I guess I'm kind of coming to the point now where I'm wondering, this 5 awakening sequence that you're doing with pupils, which I know is quite a specific thing. And I know you're going to offer a separate episode as a bonus, very kindly, teaching people how to use that method. And you're going to do that with us. But is there anything that you can kind of just give us like an overview of what that is and in what ways that's being used with pupils in school?
So yes, so Five Awakenings is something that was developed by a lovely lady called Rena Guttridge. And this was developed through her. She was originally a nurse, and she started to work with EFT, emotional freedom technique, or sometimes it's called tapping, which involves tapping on acupuncture points in the body to help send calming signals to the brain. And from her extensive work, she worked a lot with the EFT and with the modality of energy medicine. She started to develop a technique that is called the Five Awakening sequence. And it is absolutely fabulous. It is a really straightforward, simple technique to use. And it can be used to help you essentially to just process anything that has happened. So anything that's happened to you, you can process it through very straightforward. You will just draw out whatever it is that you're feeling. And when we draw it out, it doesn't have to be an artist's impression. It just needs to be about just representing on paper and a pencil whatever it is you're feeling. And then you will use the technique, which is really simple, really straightforward. And this technique will use colour, will use intention, will use words, and uses energy medicine as a way of helping your body and your energy field to process whatever it is that's happened that is causing disruption in your life. This has been used in schools. At the moment, I've used it on a one-to-one basis. When I work with pupils one-to-one, I will work and use the Five Awakenings with them. It has been used as a project in the primary schools in Wigan. This was in, let me just get the years right, it was in, I think, 2018 and 2019, two lovely, lovely ladies called Lindsay Chesworth and Angela Connolly. They worked together and they got funding to work in primary schools and family centres. And what they did was they taught parent programmes, and they went into primary schools and taught staff how to use the Five Awakenings. And they also taught this in parent groups as well. And they have got, they got evidence that when it was used in primary school, that they had a 70% reduction in behaviour issues, in that staff were trained in how to use it. It's really, really simple, very simple process. And what they would have is in the corner of the classroom, they'd have some paper and pencils. And so if the pupils came in from break time and they'd maybe be feeling a bit anxious or something had happened, they could just get the paper out, draw it out, colour it in, and then just go into the lesson and everything would be okay, because they were able to have something that was instantly to process this. So this was a project that happened in those schools in Wigan. We've also had in Yorkshire, there's been quite a few people who've trained in this and who have gone into schools and done voluntary sessions, where they've gone in and done one-to-one voluntary sessions with pupils. And then there's been projects where social services have started then referring people to some of the therapists to work with the Five Awakenings, in particular people where they kind of feel that they don't fit certain criteria. I know at the moment we've got what are called mental health support team workers in schools who are really good, and they work with pupils individually and in small groups. They also work with parents. But what we found is sometimes they have a criteria to work with them. And actually, if we've got a pupil where that criteria is not met, then Five Awakenings is really helpful, because it doesn't have criteria, as in it doesn't have to be anxiety, it doesn't have to be depression, it can be anything that is dysregulating your nervous system. So at the moment, Lindsay Chesworth is now working in the Warrington area, and she has just trained 4 members of staff who are NHS employed and NHS based. And those 4 members of staff have been trained in quite a few modalities about well-being, one of them being 5 Awakenings. So they're now going into 40 primary schools in Warrington, and they will be using the 5 Awakenings with the primary schools in Warrington. And so from that, we will get back specific, feedback, results and data about exactly what the impact has been in using this in those schools. So it's really, there's lots of pockets of areas where this is something that is developing. We've just recently, well, not really, I think it was last year, that we had 5 teachers come over from Iraq, and they trained in 5 Awakenings and have gone back to Iraq and are now using this in schools in Iraq. So there's lots of little pockets of development where the 5 Awakenings is being used and is being developed and is starting to grow for lots of areas to help support. It's really good for children and teenagers in that if they don't want to talk about something, they don't have to. They can literally just draw it out and then use the sequence. It's also helpful for adults when they are looking at processing things that have happened in childhood that they haven't been able to process and actually don't want to talk about, don't want to go back to, and they're just able to work with that, and just because it's very, very simple.
Yeah, it does sound simple. It really does. And I know you're going to teach us the method, so maybe on that call you could explain a little bit about how it's working. I really hope it goes well in Warrington. Have you had any feedback from Wigan and kind of what happened there, and what are you seeing yourself with it? Is it working? Is it helping?
Yes, yeah, most definitely. Yeah, just that it's just that thing of that having something that is really, really simple, and having something, I think in particular, the feedback that we're getting at the moment from people is actually lots of people at the moment are, because mental health is coming up as a huge subject, as it rightly should do. And lots of people are kind of going into places and are able to talk about lots of things and to able to deliver lots of things. But actually what people need is they need something practical they can be left with. Actually, this is something, it's very simple, it's very practical, and it's very easy to use. So it doesn't require a lot of input. It just, it can be done in a day's training. It's really, really, really straightforward. And it's just something that people can be left with, that they have something, they've got a tool that they can use. So what we're finding is that people are really grateful that they've got this tool that they can use that is really straightforward, that it's like, yes, I have all the understanding about what is going on and why it's happening, and I get all that, and I find that really helpful. But actually, do you know what? I need something that can just, that can help me with that. So we've got lots of cases of, we're getting really kind of straightforward and simple responses. We had one where a little boy didn't want to go on a residential, and it was quite an important residential, and it would have been very important for their development and what was happening. And so just sat down, one of the people who've been trained in this sat down, did a session with them, and they literally kind of the next day, mum phoned in and said, yes, he's coming, it's not a problem, straight away, no. And there's no sort of like analysis or discussion, or it's, we found in a lot of times it's just like an instant shift, and it's just like, yeah, I'm coming, getting up and going, right, yes, I'm coming to the residential. So there's lots of examples of there where, the shifts are very quick, because it's not needing to be analysed, it's just drawn out, coloured in, work with the colours, set the intention, and just like move on.
Well, that is brilliant. And anybody can use this then, if it's that simple and without needing the experience of, being psychoanalytical
Mm,
or anything like that. You don't really need any skills from the sound of it. You just literally
mm,
need pen and
mm,
paper. Is that
mm.
right?
Yes. Yeah.
Wonderful. That's brilliant. So I think we are sort of coming to the end of this episode now. Is there anything that you haven't said that you want to say?
I think there's a lot I could talk about 5 awakenings that I haven't spoken about, but I will think through that in our next episode when I will do the session on how to do it. I will put some in there. But yeah, 5 awakenings it's very simple. So yeah, it's very simple to use.
Okay. Well, yes. So when we record the episode with the method, you absolutely can talk about it and explain what's happening and what's good about it, and or anything that you want to say about it, you can definitely say in that episode. Absolutely. So just before we go, do you want to tell people where they can contact you if they want to? I know you've got that lovely Facebook page, You Are Loved, that I love.
Thank you. Yes, so that's my Facebook page. I will also give the links to if at the moment our 5 awakenings website. The 5 awakenings does have a website, but at the moment it is down as we're having that rebuilt, and it's literally the5awakenings.co.uk, and it is THE, and then it's the number 5 and awakenings.co.uk. But I will give you these links to put on the links with the podcast. There is a Facebook page called 5 awakenings, so you can have a look at those. And there is an email address called facescoaching@gmail.com.
Right, that's great. Well, just before we go, I would really like to say thank you to you and to all teachers for everything that you're doing and for holding the energy of this, what feels like quite a big transition from the old sort of educational ways to the new, and for being there for all of our children through this as well. Thank you so much. I think what you're doing is absolutely incredible, and I'm so grateful to each and every one of you for doing this. Yeah, and for, how difficult it is and challenging it is to be a teacher, and how you still keep doing it and showing up with compassion and empathy. That is remarkable. So thank you so much. Okay, so listeners, thank you so much for joining us for this episode. As I've mentioned, there is going to be, so if you look along the list above this one, there will be a bonus episode, which will be Jennifer sharing this 5 awakening sequence with you all, so that you can use it with your own children, which is really kind of her. So hopefully we'll see you over on that episode. But if we leave you here, we leave you with love. Okay, lots of love. Thanks so much, Jennifer. It's been wonderful. I've really enjoyed chatting with you. Thank you. Bye, everyone. Thank you for listening to the Healing the Patriarchy with Love podcast. Just by listening to this show, you have contributed to the positive end to patriarchy, so thank you for that. Please follow, subscribe, and share the podcast so we can amplify the good further and help others to join us. If you would like to support more episodes, please visit the show notes where you can donate. I appreciate any help you can give, and once again, thank you for being here.